The 7 deadly sins: greed, lust, envy, pride, gluttony, wrath, and sloth. There are 7 GTA 5 characters in particular that perfectly exemplify these 7 deadly sins. Starting with greed. Greed is the uncontrollable desire for more, especially when it means sacrificing something important to get it. Devin Weston is the perfect candidate for this sin. He's a billionaire who hides behind a fabricated yoga namaste persona, but every move he makes is driven by profit at any cost. He amasses a fortune exploiting, blackmailing, and lying to both employees and business partners. He gets Michael, Franklin, and Trevor, 3 of the most skilled criminals in America, to risk their lives for luxury cars, then ghosts them on the payment with a smug, "Don't worry, I invested it for you." He tries to burn down Solomon Richards' movie studio just to trigger an insurance payout. And when that doesn't work, he sends his Merryweather goons to murder Michael's family. Weston has his hands in just about every business imaginable. Pro sports, hospitality, fashion, alcohol, the country of Greece. But of course it's not enough. He's willing to ruin countless lives if it bumps one of his stocks up by half a point. Unfortunately for Weston, he messed with a few people who are just not to be messed with. But even in the final scene of his life, trapped in a car trunk, seconds from death, he still tries to cut a deal. Greed most certainly got the best of him in the end. But the same cannot be said for the character who indulged in lust. Lust is unrestrained sexual desire, often at the cost of sacrificing something pure to satisfy it. Amanda De Santa is the perfect candidate for the sin of lust. The former stripper turned Rockford Hills housewife was gifted the life most women dream of, but she allowed her already imperfect marriage to be further destroyed by her desires. In the early 90s, Amanda was working at a strip club with her sisters that her mother owned. This was where she would eventually meet the soon notorious criminal Michael Townley, but it wouldn't be long before she was living an entirely different life, beginning with Amanda and Michael marrying and having 2 children, living in a trailer in the Midwest. But as Michael's criminal notoriety grew, so did his fear for the safety of his family. And that fear convinced him to sell out to FIB agent Dave Norton in exchange for security and a new lease on life. Amanda was skeptical of Michael's grand scheme, though despite some complications, the young family ends up in beautiful Los Santos with a big house, nice cars, and millions of dollars. But their marriage quickly takes a turn for the worse, with Amanda objecting to who her children are becoming and constantly fighting with Michael, who has nothing better to do than lay around, drink, and yell now that he's out of the game. She alleges Michael was the first to become unfaithful, but in the events of Grand Theft Auto V, Amanda's infidelity becomes much more prevalent than her husband's, racking up affairs with the tennis coach, yoga instructor, a Jesus impersonator, and an actual hippie bum, proving that the filthy Amanda from her youth is still alive and well. Only after running off with Fabian does she come to some understanding of the type of lowlives she's been drawn to, and willingly returns home to work on her marriage with Michael. But she wasn't the only woman in the De Santa family to take issue with the man of the house, as the next character on the list had her fair share of daddy issues. Envy is a deep desire for what someone else has, but taken even further, it can become the intense urge to become them entirely. Tracey De Santa is envy personified. A stereotypical Rockford Hills daddy's girl born into wealth who constructed her entire vision of her future self based on what Vinewood culture influences attractive young women to be. Rather than growing up with a modest lifestyle in a small Midwestern town, Tracey became enamored with the materialistic, superficial culture of Los Santos at a young age, causing her to behave in ways her parents didn't approve of. And despite her tramp stamp, butterfly tattoo, and rebellious or even promiscuous behavior, what makes Tracey's vulnerability to the sin of envy even more tragic is the fact that she clearly has a good soul. She's not a perfect church girl by any means, but she does have good intentions. The woman she became was more a result of subpar parenting and lack of intelligence, which makes her overly impressionable. So when left unprotected, she often finds herself in situations she shouldn't be in, whether it's being the butt of the joke on Fame or Shame or on a yacht with adult film producers. So while her envy of Vinewood celebrities and reality stars with expensive clothes, flashy cars, and undeserved fame make her despicable in some ways, she displays an adoration for the powerful men in her life, whether it be Trevor or her father Michael, who represents the sin of pride. Pride is a dangerously selfish mindset, putting your own desires, urges, and ego above the well-being of others. If we take a look at the events that transpired in Michael De Santa's life, it's easy to say he was consumed by sinful pride. Even going back to his high school days, Michael, a star quarterback, was plagued by injuries and temperament issues. So began a life of crime. And while you might not think that's something to be proud of, Michael took great pride in his craft, perfecting his skills as both a marksman and leader, ultimately partnering and committing robberies across the Midwest with none other than Trevor Philips, and later on, Brad Snyder. But in 2004, 2 decades into his criminal career, he met the corrupt FIB agent Dave Norton, with whom he made a secret agreement. It was through this agreement that Michael would show his true prideful colors, sacrificing the welfare of his partners for his own personal gain. The plan was to set his own crew up to be taken down during a heist in North Yankton. Snyder was to be arrested and the unhinged Trevor Philips shot dead, while Michael got to fake his death and run free with his family, giving Norton all of the glory for putting an end to the legendary trio. And while it didn't go quite as planned, Michael still got his new name and new life in Rockford Hills, albeit with Trevor on the loose haunting Michael with the fear that he might someday show up on his doorstep. And when he finally does, Michael dives deep back into the criminal game. And while being in the game is the one thing that makes him feel useful, he ends up on the bad side of a few of the most powerful people in Los Santos, putting himself and his family in more danger than ever, including the next character on our list, the ultimate glutton. Gluttony is defined as excessive consumption or indulgence in something taken to the point of waste, and Jimmy De Santa is the perfect candidate to represent gluttony with his entitled, excessive life. Now, in Jimmy's defense, he wasn't exactly given a normal life. He's both fearful and distrusting of his father, and understandably so. Michael, despite some of his best efforts, has failed to get through to his son and mold him into the man he wants him to become, leaving him with no choice but to tolerate his son's gluttonous behavior. This lack of guidance leads Jimmy down a bad road, a road that includes being out of shape, wearing clothes from a 2000s rap video, no willpower, acting like a wannabe gangster, having a filthy bedroom, grease-coated fingers, and sucking down ungodly amounts of junk food, soda, and weed. The only thing that makes him break a sweat is screaming at 12-year-olds through his headset. While Michael is partly to blame, Jimmy becomes everything his father despises. And even worse, Jimmy blames him for all of his problems without acknowledging that he is most responsible for what will become of his life, lazily using his father's criminal past as the scapegoat for his pudgy physique, unemployment, poor hygiene, and lack of relationships. Jimmy's poor decisions begin but do not end with being fooled by a credit fraud scheme, storing his weed in the freezer, attempting to sell his father's yacht for drug money and getting himself kidnapped in the process and needing his life to be saved, and last but certainly not least, drugging Michael to steal his car and then take sides with his mother. And the next character, who represents Wrath, even took note of Jimmy's weight gain upon seeing him for the first time in 9 years. Wrath is the simplest of the 7 deadly sins, defined as uncontrolled, excessive anger that often leads to violence, vengeance, or destruction. There are countless people in the GTA universe who fall victim to the sin of wrath, whether it be Michael, Martin Madrazo, or Devin Weston, just to name a few. But there's actually someone who's angrier than everyone in the game put together. And even without ever playing the game, you probably could have guessed he would fill this spot just based on his appearance. The fact of the matter is, Trevor Philips is easily the angriest character in GTA 5, and probably in the history of GTA. And while he was always insane, when you look back on his complicated past, it's not difficult to understand why. Trevor was an unloved and troubled child with a history of rage, though he wouldn't officially pursue a career in crime until the late 1980s. After he turned 20 years old. In his youth, he was an exceptional golfer and hockey player, where he put his anger to good use. But he wasn't always finding perfect outlets, as he also took his aggression out on classmates, animals, and random drifters as a minor. Even more impressively, he was and is a talented jet pilot, but poor psychological evaluations disqualified him from flying in the Air Force. These traits didn't improve, but became more useful as he scaled up his criminal operations with Michael. In fact, once the crew's North Yankton heist went south, Trevor's wrath only increased, left without his cut of the big score and losing his 2 best friends. Even after eliminating every threat at the end of the GTA 5 story, No one can ever quite feel 100% comfortable around Trevor Philips. You could say a lot of things about Trevor, but you definitely can't say he's lazy or is not sharp as a tack. However, in terms of mental sharpness, the same could not be said for the next character on this list and our candidate for sloth. In classical terms, sloth isn't just laziness. In Christian theology, it can mean spiritual or emotional apathy, a kind of passive despair or uselessness. So while the modern pop version of sloth is not wanting to work, the deeper version includes someone who can't function productively, either mentally, emotionally, or spiritually. Wade is the embodiment of this. He's actually not choosing to be lazy. He just lacks the capacity to be anything other than what he is. He follows Trevor around like a loyal dog, incapable of making decisions or holding down any responsibility on his own. He tries, but the results are always pitiful. He's dim-witted, mentally slow, and heavily infantilized. Even his cousin Floyd treats him like a child. So he's not slothful in the sense that he's lounging around refusing to work. He's slothful in the sense that he is incapable of meaningful action. Ironically, this is much of the reason Trevor finds him useful. He will obey his every order, never object to being taken advantage of, and will believe any lie, even allowing Trevor to get away with killing his friends and cousin without ever putting his foot down. This makes him an even more tragic version of the sin. Not a rebel against hard work, but someone fundamentally unequipped for the world.